Hi, I'm George and welcome to GMakes, and this is part 2 of my how to make transitions in Blender tutorial. So let's get right to it. Alright, so here I am in Blender and this is what we made last tutorial, just as a refresher. It's a transition, it loads from the corner and loads back up, and this is the node tree for all of that. So a little refresher again, we have a position that goes into a capture attribute from our geometry. And then we have a greater than node, which is the one that's being animated, which is then being multiplied by 3.142, so multiplied by pi, to make sure that these are being flipped over, because again, we have that back face culling on the material, and then that is being combined, just the y value, being put into the rotation of an instance on points. We're instancing this grid. I've just got the scale out of this value node right here. And then that is being, material is being set, and that material again is this bright green one. That is just because I want to use this as a matte, as a track matte for compositing. You could of course also project an image from your camera onto this if you just want to export right out of Blender with whatever footage you have, but I want to be able to use this just as kind of an overlay and again as a track matte in a compositing software or editing software such as Premiere Pro. So that's my material. And then a material input, you could also do a realize instances, but I'm not doing that since I'm keeping this as geometry node and procedural, and then it's being outputted. And all together, we get this nice transition. And I really like it. And so now we're going to use this basis that we've created with all of this to make a couple more transitions and kind of show what you can do with this and how you can expand it and experiment and utilize this method. But to start, we're going to fix a couple of things because I say it's procedural, but at this moment, this is not fully procedural. The reason being that this rectangle we have, this 16 by 9, we went into edit mode and we did this. We've subdivided it in edit mode. You can't undo that very easily, so it's not, and you can't undo it at like a slider or a click of a button, so it's not fully procedural right now. So we're going to correct that, and then we're going to get into making some new transitions. All right, so let's get right to it. All right, so to start off, I'm going to insert a new plane. I'm going to scale that up just so it matches our camera, and then I'm going to apply that scale right there. Not super important, but it does help fix any weirdness later. And now I'm going to add a new geometry node to this. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to go to edit mode or anything. I'm just going to stick right here. And we're going to add a new geometry node, having that selected. And then I've already copied what was in our original geometry node from the tutorial, from the first part of this tutorial, into geometry node number 2 right here. So if I zoom out and find it, there we go. This is everything we've already done. I'm going to clear these keyframes because they don't matter anymore. But there we go, clear keyframe, and we're just going to set this to 0. But you can see because this is just your standard grid, your standard plane, there's only 4 points on the corner, and those are being instanced right there. So how do we get this subdivided so that we can actually use it? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Right before this capture attribute with our geometry right here, we're just going to add a subdivide mesh node, and you can see it already did it once. So we've got one subdivision, so it's that cross in the middle, and we can up that to, I'm going to keep my squares fairly big for this tutorial just so you can see everything that's going on. So I'm going to just go 3 levels of subdivision, but you can go way high. You can keep going. I probably wouldn't go past 10 without letting your computer think about it. So that's how you subdivide it. You can see now we have a bunch of subdivisions, and you can see at 0, again, some of these are turned over, so you can see our greater than is still working with all of that. But we're gonna get right into the first transition. So I'm gonna correct the sizing, the scale of some of these, and also before I do that, before we jump into the first one, one thing I'm gonna do, because again, I don't want to scale this along the y-axis, this new plane we have, because I want to keep these as squares. I want to keep everything equidistant, just so that I only see what I'm working with. I'm going to select my camera, go over here to the camera settings in the properties panel, and then in the pass the part out, that's how I'm saying it, I'm just going to go all the way to 100 so that everything else is blacked out and I can only see what the camera sees. All right, so I'm going to fix the scale of these instances and then we're going to get right on with our first transition. All right, so I fixed that scale. You can see it's not quite lined up. If I really wanted to, I could take this and I could just move it along the y-axis to get a corner, but I don't care that much, especially for this tutorial. I'm just doing the basics for you so you can make something that looks really, really good. But so we have right here, this is again, nothing's going to happen because I deleted those keyframes, but this is the base of what we made in the first part. So how do we get something new out of this? Well, pretty darn simple. And like I think the tutorial says, this is one transition, a whole bunch of transitions out of one node. And this node, of course, is our greater than node, which we've already been using. So how do we get a whole bunch of transitions out of this? Well, you have to do a couple things first. So first things first, we have to take this capture attribute and we have to modify it a little bit. So right now, again, it's doing that floating point value where it's taking, it's outputting a single number, which is the X, Y, and Z coordinates, getting a number out of those. And that's why we're getting this diagonal right here. So because we want to be able to control each axis separately, we're going to switch from float to vector. And there we go. It's already disappeared because, again, it's now 3 separate values. But it's also disconnected because we've changed that. And again, if we plug it back in, we're going to get the same thing because again, now it's taking all 3 of those values and adding it into one single value. We don't want that. A lot of words right there. But gist is we want to take a separate X, Y, and Z. If I can find the right one. There we go. Separate X, Y, and Z. We're going to take the attribute. Now it's purple because it's a vector. Plug it in. That's our vector. And now we have all 3 axes. So we have X, Y, and Z. We're going to mostly focus on X, and that will go from left to right or right to left, just because I like that look, and it's a pretty standard one for transitions. Now, you may notice that over here on the greater than, there's a value, and then the threshold doesn't have a number. To fix that, we're just going to plug both of those in. Again, that's getting us back because we're adding 2, and now the threshold value pops back up. It just is weird sometimes like that. But now you can see we only have the X value, so we're no longer diagonal. We are all horizontal going across. But now this is it. This is the first transition, everybody. This is your classic slide transition. So again, I'm going to go to frame 10 down here. I'm going to make these a little quicker. I'm going to make these 30 frames. I'm going to export these at 30 frames a second. So that's about a second of footage for this transition, as opposed to the much longer and slower one I was doing before. Again, you can modify as you want, but I'm going to go 30 frames. So I'm going to find on this threshold value, I'm going to find where this goes off screen. And because I have some pretty big chunky ones, it's going to take a while of me to go down. And there we go. I'm going to just see how close I can get that. So it looks like it pops into screen at 5, -5. So I'm going to go just one below that, -5.1. And I'm going to hit I. And now I'm going to go 30 frames in the future. So I'm going to go to frame 40. And now it should be roughly a good, the positive value of that. So it will go off screen at 5 again, 5.1. That's a value of 10. Again, I have big chunky boys, but they'll be the even values. So your negative and then your positive ends of that. I'm going to hit I again. And now I'm going to change my start down to 50. So I'm only looking at 50 frames right here. And there we go. It loads. It does load a little slowly, you might notice. So that's partly because I have big chunky boys for my grids. If you have smaller ones, you'll be a little bit smoother. But also, I want to change one thing real quick for this greater than node. And that is I'm going to make sure it's selected. I'm going to change to my graph editor. And you can see I have a Bezier curve for these. And I don't want that. I want this to be linear. I want it to stay the same speed from beginning to end. You could also have it kind of slowly get in and then stay the same speed. It's your preference. Or you could keep it as this. But I'm just going to select both of those. And I'm going to change the interpolation mode to linear. And that just gets me a little bit more what I want out of this. Again, it's a little chunky because I have big instances. So if you want it smoother, just do smaller instances, subdivide your mesh a little bit more, and then mess with your scale. All right, so that's the first one. That is the first transition. That is a slide. Very classic. Here, I'll deselect the plane so you can see it without all those grids. And there we go. So one piece of footage sliding over the other piece of footage. Pretty straightforward, great, and a basis for all the other transitions we're going to make in this tutorial. We're going to make 2 more, one using this method pretty much exactly, and the other using something slightly different, but they're both going to be based on this greater than node. And let's get right to it. So let's get to that second transition. All right, so for the second transition, we are going to do a modification on the slide transition. We are going to do a split. So the footage will be split down the middle and then go left and right, because again, we're messing with the y-axis. You could also do this with or messing with the x-axis, excuse me. You can also do this with the y-axis. So we're going to stick with this wonderful greater than node, but then I'm just going to scoot everything over. We're going to, I've already got it set here, we're going to take another math node. I know, more math, who doesn't love that? But we're going to put that math node in between our separate x, y, and z and our greater than, and we're going to switch it from add to this wonderful absolute. And you can see it already changed it. Because again, it's absolute, so it's saying whatever this is, whether it's negative or positive, the output value, it's going to be positive. If it's -1, it's actually 1, because it's the absolute value of a thing. You can clamp it, but don't clamp it because that messes with it. But now you can see if I go to the beginning, hit play, there we go. So again, you can mess with your frames right here to find exactly that moment where it pops in. See, it's going to be at 0 because it's absolute. I'm not going to do that right now because, again, I just want to do the concepts of these. But to make it look good, you can mess around to be 0, and then it looks like, again, that 5.1. But that is an absolute. So that is how we get that split transition. Again, from the middle outwards. It's wonderful. I love it. Again, based on just this greater than. I have not touched this greater than. I've just added another math node in front of it. Another way you could do this theoretically, I actually tested this before I found this method, is you can, if I copy this over, you can use a compare node because that's going to compare 2 values. But then you got to plug it in, and then you got to mess with your 2 values. And also I found it never quite closed. There's always a gap in the middle, which wasn't too big of a deal. So you can also do that method, but that's messier and not as good. So I don't know why you would do that unless you want to make things harder and look worse for yourself. But so we just have this absolute and greater than node. All right, that's transition number 2, a split transition. Let's go on to a slightly different way of making a transition, but this is transition number 3. All right, so for transition number 3, we are going to do one of my favorite transitions. I really love it. It's kind of the effect you get when you render something in Blender, and it is the random blocks transition. Of course, actually running in Blender, there is a little bit of a method because it goes around whatever. But I love the random blocks transition, so we're going to do that. And so I've got a fresh, this is the one we were just using. I got a fresh greater than node right here. And this one's super simpler even than the just standard greater than, because we don't even need any of this stuff over here. We don't need this capture attribute. We don't need this position node. We don't need to separate x, y, and z. Why? Because this isn't really based on the coordinates of where something is. This is random. So first things first, we're going to also grab not a math node, but a random value node. It's wonderful. It's right there in the name. It's a random value. And we're going to plug that value into value. And now we can plug that greater than down here into our multiply, because again, we need that pi. And look, you can even see it. You can even mess with it. Look at it loads up, bada bing, bada boom. So we can you can find your min and max values if you want to. You can change those around. I'm going to keep them as they were at 1. You can mess with your seed if you're not quite liking the look you get, looking the like you get. Yeah, that's it. Random blocks right there. So we're going to, again, animate this. I'm going to go to my 10th frame down here. I'm going to find that spot where everything is blank. So it looks like just at -0.02. I'm going to hit I, and then should probably be, I'm going to go over to 40, and then it'll probably be somewhere around, like, yeah, just around 1 we get there. So I'll find that. For me, it's 0.98, which is exactly 1 past where my initial frame was. So I'm going to make sure I'm over that. I'm going to hit I, and now if I hit play, blocks loaded in. This one, I actually do like the Bezier curve to it because I think it adds a nice little like ramp up in speed. But again, if I want to switch this to linear to make it the same, I will select my greater than. If nothing's showing up in your graph editor, make sure that your plane is selected or whatever object you're working on, and then it should pop up as long as you also have the node selected. So I'll, just for posterity's sake, I'll change these to linear as well so you can see what that looks like. You can see there's not quite as much of a build, but it does look pretty smooth. So I like the chunkier blocks for this random value, which again, if you were using smoother ones to get your slide or your split, you can then very easily put down your level of subdivisions and just modify your scale right here, and you've got a whole new transition procedurally. You don't have to do a whole bunch of work. So that's our random blocks transition. And the last one we're going to cover in this tutorial. So that is 3 transitions using one kind of node, which is, they're all based on this greater than value. This greater than node. And again, it's really like 5 because the random doesn't matter what you do X, Y, or Z because it's random. But both the slide and the split transition can be both horizontally with the X values, or they can be vertical with the Y values. And that's pretty darn awesome. So now there should be popping up pretty soon a splash screen of kind of all the other transitions you can do with this. You can do things like Venetian blinds and stuff. So these are just ones I've messed with and that I like. They should be labeled with either the standard name for them or a name I've made up, as well as the math node or math nodes, because they all base the greater than. So it's if there's just a math node onto that, it's going to be that first node plugged into the greater than node, the method we've been using this whole time. So take a look, pause the video, see if there's one you like. Hopefully it's not too much of an overload. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and this little series, part 1 and part 2. I hope you make something cool with it. I hope you experiment with these math nodes. There's a ton you can do, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.